Hello guys, Danny here at PARTAY. So I had planned originally to do the three displays of Vega today, one in harsh light, one in moderate, one in low. Unfortunately though, we have a series of major storms that are coming through the area today, so I'm not going to get the opportunity to coat the UST, and I wanted to recoat the original Vega because I've got a few scratches on it from moving it around. Some of the equipment that I've been working in the front room with. So just feels like probably tomorrow or Saturday may work out better for that. If not, Sunday at the latest, definitely, and we'll do that display. So today, that leaves me with a prime opportunity to talk about what differentiates Partay from standard paint mixes. And so we're going to start that conversation by talking about the first paint mixer. So here we go. All right. So patient zero, actually the original mixologist for projection screens was Adele DeBerry, who in 1909 started playing around with some silver paint that she'd come across, working on it on different canvases, trying to perfect her formula, and thus we get the term silver screen. So the original founder, the original mixologist was Adele DeBerry. Now she was 24 years old at that time, so obviously this is a couple of years after her 24th birthday. But 1909 is how long ago she discovered that. That was 1 year before Kenneth Bird started his silver screen mix. Sorry, I had to throw that in. But I think it's really cool to think that back in 1909, you had your first projection screen mixologist doing many of the same things that the folks out there in the community who carry that tradition on today, she did them herself. So what's happened in the 110 years since then? Well, a lot. Actually, for a while, not a whole lot. There were some innovations. They started using some silver dust and things like that in the silver screens. But all in all, the screens really didn't change that much until a bit later. And there's a lot of things that we could cover in that realm, but I don't know that it's really contextual to what we need to talk about today. So what are the things that led to what differentiates Partay? Well, we'll get into that. Let's take a look. Okay, so the graphic that you're looking at here is just an example of a multi-layer screen. Now, not necessarily, this is an optical screen, but not in the same context as, say, like a Screen Innovations Black Diamond or, a number of the other screens out there, Elites 5D, 3D, all of those kinds of screens, right? And it doesn't get into, now multi-layer doesn't necessarily include like the CLR series. Those are more the either lenticular or sawtooth type screens. And there were things that happened in between with different patterns, like Fresnel patterns. Some of you guys may know it as Fresnel or may refer to it as Fresnel. So you had those kind of things that occurred as well. But this is the suit that Partay followed. Now, many of you wouldn't know this because I've never really mentioned it, I think, in any of the videos that we've done previously. But we originally started using spray paints. And the reason for that was because we were playing around with the layering system, trying to figure out, exactly how we could do that. Plus, I'm not a big fan of rollers and paintbrushes. But anyway, it led us to getting into more traditional paints, including rollers and paintbrushes, and trying to do thin layering to achieve the goal that we were after. Ultimately, we always hit a ceiling. There was always a ceiling because of many reasons, but specifically with paint, standard paints, and when I say standard paints, I'm talking about any kind of off-the-shelf type paint that you would use, any type of printing paints, things like that. There's one component in them that actually caps a ceiling on what your performance is going to be, unfortunately. And it takes a lot of optical understanding to try to achieve a specific goal once you start getting past a certain tone. So let me explain that. As long as you're working with lighter colors, getting a highly reflective surface that's very well balanced is fundamentally easier than as when you get into darker tones. When you start getting into darker grays and up to a black mix, it takes a lot more perfection to get it to do the things that you want it to do. Now, you can get away with using, like, you can use just a flat black and use, say, a 4200 lumen projector and still pick up a decent image, according to how far back from the screen that you are. And according to how big of a screen that you're actually trying to, or how big of an image that you're trying to produce. If you're only trying to produce a 60-inch or an 80-inch image, it can look really nice and bright. But as soon as you blow that up to 100, 110, you really start to see the screen suffer. And you can see that in some video demos where, specific people use a 140 or so inch, screen, and you can really see how it starts to dim out because of the black component. What's happening there? Well, the black is absorbing more light than it's reflecting. So unfortunately, you're not getting as much of a return. The layering system is exactly what helps overcome that ceiling. And understanding the layering system, now this is just an example here of a max white. It's a matte 1.1 gain screen material. You can make a matte white that doesn't even have a layering system and it'll work just fine. Matte screens, or especially like a matte 1.0 white screen, is very balanced. You're generally never going to see any kind of hot spotting. It's going to be balanced all the way across the surface. But what happens is, as soon as you introduce ambient light, all cards are off the table, right? So the whole game changes then. And that's what led these guys like Screen Innovations. I remember watching one of their videos where I believe the guy who actually created their initial Black Diamond screen, and you'll hear me mention Black Diamond a lot because of the screens that I've seen out there, it's my favorite, okay? It's my favorite of the manufactured screens. I don't own one because I won't pay that much for one, but they are a great screen, especially the one. To me, the 1.2 is better than the 1.4 because I get the contrast that you're looking for and exceptional brightness, just an overall balanced image that you would get, and it's great for movies, it's great for TV, it's great for everything. The 1.4 gets a little bright for me. The 0.8 version is a little dim for me. It's pretty solid image, but it starts to darken out a lot more on the sides. Your viewing angle is pretty tight. Now, I don't mind a shortened viewing angle. I know that I've seen some folks out here on the community talk about the viewing angle as if, the viewing angle is everything, and it's not. If you deal with this enough, you start to understand that as you go to scale, if you're using a small little sample panel of a screen material that has a narrow viewing cone, narrow saying 80 to 90 degrees, on a small panel, it looks even tighter because you're only getting a small portion of the light from the projector that's actually hitting that panel, so you don't get the full scale. Everything changes its scale. As soon as you take that narrow viewing cone and you bust it up to a 100, 110, 120 inch screen, the viewing cone opens up quite a bit, and it's nowhere near as dim on the sides. So you guys need to keep that in mind too whenever you're watching these videos where people do comparisons against narrow viewing cone screens. I've seen people do things against the Seymours and things like that, and the Elite 5D, where they have a very narrow viewing cone on that small sample size. So it's really, it's not fair. It's very inaccurate to do a comparison against those small panels like that, because you never, ever give the small panel the opportunity to really compare against your product unless you were doing the same sample size of your product side by side with them. So long story short, getting into the layering system, this is what really got us going and started moving us away from any paint component, not because paint's like this horrible substance, it just presented a ceiling. Okay, and it did not allow you the flexibility to go dark and maintain the same imagery that you would have if you were doing, say, a mid-gray or a light gray screen. And I'll show you an example of that in just a minute, how it may seem subtle to some folks, but subtle in projection can be everything. Okay, the difference between a point 0.8 and a point 0.9 gain screen can be massive to the viewer. So it all matters. It's all contextual. But in a layering system, essentially what you've got, if any of you guys out there who work with cars, you know that, when your car won't start, it's generally either a problem of three components, either spark, air, or fuel, right? So in a screen, you basically have three components as well. One of those being reflectivity, right? The other one being neutrality. And then I'll talk about the final one in a minute, but let's talk about reflectivity. So if just having a very reflective surface was all it took, then essentially we could all just buy big mirrors and call it a day. But obviously that does not work. Or you could take a piece of shiny metal and, shine your projector at it and call it a day. But once again, that will not work because reflectivity is only one portion of that. Neutrality is the other portion. Okay, so neutrality is you don't want to shift your colors. You start getting too much silver or silvery metallic kind of component inside of your screen mix, and the next thing you know, you're shifting your colors and the colors look all wonky. They're never going to be those beautiful, vibrant, bright, primary, secondary type of colors. They're going to just be sort of this hodgepodge of I don't know, they almost, sometimes they can go almost more of pastel, your yellows will go green, etc., etc., etc. All right, so then that brings you to the final component, which is, anyone? It's actually filtration. So what you want to do is you want to filter things in a manner to where you balance out the screen. So you'll hear me in the past, probably you've heard me mention that we use a balancer. Well, there is an additive that we add as the next to last coat that is a balancer, and it balances out the brightness of the image so that you get a solid sheen. Okay, and then the final component for us, you see this says screen surface, but the final component for us is a diffusion layer. Now that's on our screens, our multi-layer screens. As many of you guys may remember, we had Diamante that came out just a couple of months ago. And we haven't really talked a lot about Diamante lately, and there's a reason for that. Because Diamante is a very complex process to create. It's generally a 3-day process, 2 of those in spraying, 1 in cure. So day 1, you do the first 3 layers. Day 2, you do the second 2 layers. And we're down to 5 now. We originally had it at 7 layers, but we've got it to 5. So the second day is the final 2 layers, and then the third day, you need all that to cure, right? The reason that you have a difference between your first 3 layers and your second 3 layers is because the components that we're adding in are different. They oxidize differently, and we need to give those underlying 3 components time to oxidize and cure overnight before we go back over them with 2 additional components that could cause problems. You could get bubbles and things like that that would arise in the screen. So we have to be careful with that. Because of the complexity around Diamante, we have relegated Diamante to just a local screen. We do those now on acrylic. We can't do PVC, prefer to do acrylic or puckboard. So that's where Diamante has been. If you've wondered why we haven't mentioned Diamante on the YouTube channel, that's why. For YouTube, Diamante opened up a lot of doors for us. Once we discovered, and back in the day I referred to it as a Serious Pro, and then we had come up with additional innovations to it until we got it to where we felt like it was perfected at a 5-layer system. And it's humming along now, but out of that, Goppity Goop was spawned. And Goppity Goop was a response to people's desire to have a DIY product, something that I'd really never had intended to get involved in, but it sparked it because we had a number of people that were asking if they could buy it, if they could buy the mix, They wanted to coat their own kind of material. So we started looking around. started doing some work with the different components of Diamante to try to figure something out for a DIY solution. Now, here's the difference between Diamante and gobbledygook. Because Diamante is a multi-layer system, okay, coated in multiple layers of polymers, not paint, polymers of different, so you notice this one here, it says polyester. So many of these polys that are being used, PVC is a type of polymer, polyester is a type of polymer. You know, it's just all poly, right? But there's different types. Just like on your milk carton, there's different types of plastics. You'll have 1s and 2s and 5s in that little recycle sign. We use different types of polymers, and the reason that we use different types is because they have different densities and they have different particle inclusions. So we had to find the right ones, mix them into a hybrid that works the way that we want it to. And what that does is it allows us to create things that would have never have been possible with standard paint mixes. Okay? One of those being Diamante. So the difference between Diamante and gobbledygook is that Diamante contains no solid or reflective solids. What does that mean? Well, that means it has no metallic. It has no mica. It has no beads. It has no glass particles, no diamond particles, no none of that stuff, right? It's totally liquid based. Well, what's the purpose of that? Totally liquid based, no physical particles in there, allows you to have a crisp, clean imagery that a standard screen just doesn't live up to. It's subtle, but it's noticeable. It's the difference between 4K and 1080 on a 100-inch screen. You notice, okay? You notice the difference. On a phone or in a video, a lot of times you won't pick up the difference because it's really all about contrast and color and stuff like that. But with the eye, you definitely notice. So it is, to us, the flagship of the PARTAY line. Gobbledygook is a more practical solution. It does include reflective solids, but we had to do it in a manner where it would produce similar type results as a layered system. Well, how do you do that? Well, that means that you have to layer those reflective particles in a manner where they're suspended in a single layer as they would be if you got the reflection from multiple layers of liquid. And that's really about the best way that I can explain it there without going into too much detail and proprietary information. But let me just say that gobbledygook is sort of a little miracle of condensing a multi-layer system into a solid layer system, a single layer. Okay, so you hear us talk about single stage. That's because single stage means essentially instead of getting multiple layers where each layer performs a certain function, all the functions are being performed, not as premierly as Diamante does, but all of those functions are being performed in a single stage coating. Okay, single stage coating. So you may spray on multiple coats, but it's all the same stuff. Just like you may paint multiple coats on your wall, but it's all the same paint. In the multi-layer system, these would all be different layers. Well, in Diamante there's 4 different components. So one component is actually 2 layers. It's done in 2 layers, not side by side with each other. So there's some insight into what makes us different. We do this because this is what the professional companies do. They do it with film technology, and when I say film technology, these are basically PVC films, polyester films that are made in single sheets. They're bonded, whether through some sort of adhesion or some sort of fusion, and that would involve heat. Many times they're often bonded with heat. And then there's multiple layers. All of that takes manufacturing precision, very costly, requires resources, expertise, very costly. For us, it's liquid formulas. We can spray them. There is some expertise that's involved once you understand what it is that you're creating. But much, much more financially efficient. We can essentially get you very close to a black diamond for a very, very small, mere fraction of the cost that you would pay for one of those screens. So I'm going to give you an example here real quick. Let me pause. Okay, I'm going to do a quick display in just a moment just to show you the difference. I'm sorry, I've got the fan going. We've got a little bit of a, it's so humid outside today that the AC is causing some condensation, and I'm trying to keep it cool enough in here to where it doesn't do that. So you can see these two look very, very similar, right? This is Diamante. This was originally just a flat black paint. I took and rolled a mixture of black with some heavy mica in there to, just to bring some reflectivity out, so we could do a comparison against the two. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to is when you look at this, now you're going to see texture in there. That is the texture of the board that this is painted on. It's a canvas board. You can buy these at Walmart or somewhere like that. I use them as test panels. But you can see that it's a very balanced finish, right? And you don't see just a whole bunch of little sparklies or anything in there. So let's take them in here and set them up. Okay, so we'll set our Diamante here, and we will set our black mica here. And let's see what that gets us. Let me get my remote. All right, guys, so we're setting in some pretty bright light in here. But I'm just wanting to touch base on this. That's kind of a mid-gray. It's a different tone than my Daystar as far as the color. It's a different variation of gray. So this tends to be more of a tertiary gray here on the wall, meaning that it's mixed with a whole bunch of different colors rather than just white and black. And you can see how the sunlight's fading it out. And we can see here on this one just how much you're able to pick up here. The white's not picking up much of anything. If I get in close, you can probably see it. There we go. But this compared to this, heads and shoulders above. Let me turn on the video so that you can see it there. And guys, while this is a coating, it looks very, very, very similar to the material that you would get on a multi-layered screen that you would pay hundreds of dollars more for. Okay? The only difference is rather than do it with bonded films, which are fused through heat or some sort of adhesion, we do it with liquid layers. That's why it's different. That's why it's important. That's why that we, want to make sure that everybody knows how we're performing this, because at the end of the day, it makes a big difference. That's not to knock any sort of paint mix, because that's our foundation. That's where we started. And there's still some extremely fine mixers out there. And I've reference those who are familiar with the channel, who the friends in the community are. There's some extremely fine mixers out there who make some very nice mixes for your home. We started commercial and offered it to the home. And I think that's another thing that sort of made it a little bit different for us, because from a commercial standpoint, we had bigger shoes to fill to keep those folks happy. Many of the things that we learned in trying to fulfill some of our commercial commitments are the things that now people in their homes are benefiting from. So hopefully this adds a little bit of understanding to what makes a PARTAY screen, what makes it different, what makes it stand out. Whether that's good or bad, we'll let you guys decide. But our goal has always been to replicate the high-end screens that you'll pay thousands for, be able to make the screen look as close to a television as we possibly can. It's not going to be anywhere near an OLED. Even the blacks aren't going to be anywhere near an OLED. And anybody who tells you that they are, those $1,000 screens are nowhere near an OLED, folks. So, at the end of the day, it's trying to do as much with a screen coating as humanly possible so that you can get that daylight experience and still be able to enjoy your screen. Okay. Now, I know that there's a number of folks out there who don't necessarily agree with that philosophy. They believe that projection's meant to be done in the dark or at least dim areas. And I get that, because there's a lot of people who really, really, really like the whole immersive dark experience, like, this room here. I have no lights on right now other than just a little bit of front light that's coming in through the window. But I would just state this. I don't believe that the projection companies would be spending all the money that they have in the marketing to create high lumen projectors to overcome daylight if there wasn't a market out there for folks who were looking to overcome daylight. So practical, yes. Moving forward, yes. I think these are very exciting times for projection, at least over the next 2 to 3 years. We'll see kind of where everything goes from there. But I think that there's some opportunity to bring some of this performance to people's hands without charging them thousands of dollars to do it. So hopefully this helps give you some indication as to what differentiates PARTAY. And we, as always, we thank you for your support. You guys take care, and we'll talk to you soon.